37 Factors for an Enlightenment by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. The system of Buddhist practice is quite a lengthy journey of practice of which the mind will be progressively developed step by step. The Buddha outlined this development into the 37 factors for the enlightenment. The 37 enlightenment factors are the descriptions of a series of pathway of conditions of the mind that will be progressive along the practice step by step. That is, by performing the Buddhist practice correctly, then the collective 37 enlightenment factors will be achieved accordingly and leading to the Buddhist enlightenment. The 37 enlightenment factors can be viewed as a collective milestone of achievements, conditions, along the Buddhist practice of which all the enlightenment factors can be sequentially classified into 7 groups as follows. The first group of 37 enlightenment factors for an enlightenment is the 4 great efforts as a principle for the mind purification. In performing the Buddhist practice, it is important to understand that the goal of the practice is to completely clean up all defilements within the mind by as follows. The Buddha teaches about the principle in improving the mind with the following efforts.
1. Having an effort to avoid any problematic incoming stimulus into the mind through the 6 sense bases, then abstaining them. That is, do not add any new defilement in the mind. 2. For any impurity of defilement that already exists within the mind such as greed, hatred, and delusion, then having an effort to cleanse them out. 3. In the meantime, having the 7 factors for the enlightenment including mindfulness, researching on Dharma, effort, rapture, calmness, concentration, and equanimity to bring in wholesomeness into the mind. 4. For any wholesomeness that already exists within the mind, then maintaining it.
In Buddhism, the mind is a natural processing. Whatsoever we do and gaining experiences will be memorized as latent dispositions which will reflect in how the individual mental behavior is, no matter good or bad. What an individual life did in the past, will be stored in karma as part of latent dispositions, and this information of individuality will be automatically retrieved as an individual habit in the perception and volitional formations. Therefore, in Buddhism it is necessary to cleanse up into the inner mind, and in particularly up to the level of latent dispositions by the principle of mind purification. This principle of mind purification is very straightforward, that is, if we want to purify the mind then we should not add any dirt into the mind, and cleaning up all the dirt out, meanwhile we should fulfill the mind with wholesome stuffs and maintain them. By keeping on doing so with effort, the mind will eventually become purified. In a simple terms, during performing the Buddhist practice when detecting any arising unwholesome within the mind, then abandoning it, and then the mind will turn to be wholesome. By keeping on abandoning any erring unwholesomeness with wholesomeness and maintaining the mind to be wholesome at all times, then the mind will eventually be purified. We can see that in order to accomplish the Buddhist goal of purifying the mind, it is not an one-shot task, but it will take many tasks to be done with effort. The second group of 37 enlightenment factors for an enlightenment is the 4 conditions for getting a task done. It is a set of key success factors in performing any task. After understanding the principle of the 4 efforts in mind purification, it is very clear that there are numerous tasks to be performed in cleansing various kinds of defilements in the mind. Therefore, it is necessity to understand the general success conditions to be taken in order to accomplish in any task during the Buddhist practice as follows. 1. Firstly, in performing any task, one should have a good intention or goodwill in doing the task. Since each task requires a lot of activities to execute it, and occasionally we may experience some difficulties. 2. Secondly, one needs to put a good effort and hardship in doing the task in performing the task. The term effort here means an effort to perform the task, not an effort to forcibly demanding a result. In Buddhism a result will be attained by doing a proper cause and effect, Therefore a sufficient effort to comprehensively study the Buddha's teachings is required before having an effort in performing the practice. It should be emphasized here that the meaning of having a good effort in Buddhist practice means working hard on the numerous tasks of abandoning all arising defilements within the mind processing, as the phrase the Buddha often used, having an effort to burn all the defilements in order to purify the mind. However, it does not mean to work hard by torturing the body and mind during performing the practice of meditation, which is against the middle way of living. On the contrary, the mind needs to be cheerful, rapture, and relaxation before reaching into the one-pointedness meditation. 3. Thirdly, in order to accomplish in any task, one needs to have a good determination and mindful in doing the task and focusing on doing the task. Typically, in doing anything, we may occasionally meet a failure, but by having a good determination, we will correct a problem, and resume on working until overcoming all difficulties. 4. Fourthly, in doing any task we unavoidably have to run into several difficulties, therefore when having any problem, we must have a good reviewing and investigation of what have been done on the task in details. In going through a long journey of Buddhist practice, we should keep on reviewing and cross-checking what happening with the Buddha's teachings all the times. Each stepping progression should be investigated and evaluated step by step throughout the whole process. It should be noticed that the first and the second groups of the 37 enlightenment factors are the fundamental guidelines for Buddhist practice that we should clearly understand before getting into the detailed practicing activities. And after having a preliminary understanding on the basic principle, then we can pursue the following 29 factors in detail step by step as follows. The third and fourth groups of 37 enlightenment factors for an enlightenment are the 5 components of confidence, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, and each of them is supportive to others in terms that a faculty of one factor will empower the other factor. And in order to dwell into the inner mind, all the 5 components of confidence, effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom must be developed to be a faculty and an empowerment. Both the faculty and empowerment are necessary to improve the mind development during the Buddhist practice. The concept of faculty and empowerment are applicable in the 5 components of mind development as follows. 1. Confidence. Confidence in Buddhism is not a blind faith, but it is a faith in the truths. At the beginning of the journey in searching for the meaning of life, we may have to start with faith first, after then we have to put effort in performing mindfulness meditation to gain a wisdom anyway. 2. Effort and hardship. It is similar to the effort in the 4 paths for making an accomplishment in any task because effort is involved with the development of mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom. 3. Mindfulness. In Buddhist practice, the mindfulness will be initiated and developed from the beginning to the end. 4. Concentration. Meditation is a common practice to bring the mind to a state of one-pointedness. It is a very useful technique to empower the mind, especially in Buddhism. The meditation will be used to elevate the quality of mindfulness. 5. Wisdom. In Buddhism, the goal of Buddhist practice is the gain insight wisdom to be used in the cessation of all kinds of defilements. Many people may limit the wisdom for the insight wisdom, but in fact along the practice, the mind will slowly gain a knowledge on how to initiate a mindfulness, the way to abandon the unwholesome though, the way to become concentrated, etc. It is a cognitive process that the mind slowly develops wisdom as well. In Buddhism, having a confidence is considered as a preliminary requirement to do something with willing, then having faith in searching for the meaning of life will lead to have a right effort in doing difficult tasks during performing the Buddhist practice. Especially in Buddhist practice, we begin with faith, then leading to effort in performing the right mindfulness as a basis for Buddhist practice, then proceeding on the right concentration with mindfulness, and then eventually developing into wisdom, respectively. The two groups of factors reflect the necessity to perform a mindfulness practice and a meditation practice. And in performing the Buddhist practice, it is essential to firstly have the mindfulness before performing the meditation, mindfulness meditation, otherwise it will turn out to be a mantra meditation without the component of mindfulness instead. These five components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom are closely related to each other, and during a practice one component will be easily entwined with the other. However, it is very common, but not necessary, to develop a mindfulness before a meditation as explained by the Venerable Sariputta as follows.
Because of having the faculty in faith, then it is the basis for the empowerment of effort. And because of having the faculty in effort, thus it is the basis for the empowerment of mindfulness. Because of having the faculty of mindfulness, thus it is the basis for the empowerment of concentration. And because of having the faculty in concentration, thus it is the basis for the empowerment of wisdom. This is the reason why the faith, the effort, the mindfulness, the concentration, and the wisdom, all of them are related to the faculty quality and the empowerment quality during Buddhist practice.
In Buddhism, the qualities of faculty and of power are complemented to each other in such a way that once a specific state becomes a faculty, then it will empower the mind to escalate to the next resulting state. For example, by putting sufficient effort, then the effort will empower the mind to reach a mindfulness. Similarly, when having a faculty of mindfulness, then the mindfulness will empower the mind to reach a mindfulness meditation, not mantra meditation, respectively. The series of the relationship between faculties and empowerments in faith, in effort, in mindfulness, in meditation, and in wisdom are progressively developed throughout the Buddhist practices of mindfulness development, then the mindfulness meditation and mindfulness absorption, respectively. This sutta highlights the necessity to have a mindfulness before performing a meditation in mindfulness meditation. And this is the reason why in the system of Buddhist practice, we start with the mindfulness practice of initiation and development first, before performing a mindfulness meditation. However, for those who experiences with the meditation before, then a mindfulness practice will enhance the previous meditation skill. During the Buddha time, many of his students also were very skillful in meditation, but when listening to the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness development, then they can incorporate the mindfulness into the meditation in mindfulness meditation as well. The fifth group of 37 enlightenment factors for an enlightenment is the 4 mindfulness foundations of an insight observation. After the practice of mindfulness meditation and absorption, the mindfulness will be developed into a purified mindfulness for an insight observation in the 4 mindfulness foundations. The 4 mindfulness foundations can be considered in 2 aspects. Firstly, they are the result after performing the mindfulness meditation, and secondly, they are the tasks of performing the insight observations. That is the reason why the 4 mindfulness foundations are after the 5 elements of faculty and empowerment in the sequence of the enlightenment factors. In Buddhist practice, the quality of mindfulness is improved throughout the mindfulness development, mindfulness meditation, and mindfulness absorption until reaching purified mindfulness, what will be used for insight observations of the operating system of mind in terms of mental phenomena and the process of dependent origination. Practically in the insight observations, we go through the observations on each foundation of the 4 mindfulness foundations as follows. 1. Performing mindfulness observations on the body, to have a mindfulness to observe the object of consciousness related to the body. 2. Performing mindfulness observations on the feeling, to have a mindfulness to observe the object of consciousness related to the feeling. 3. Performing mindfulness observations on the mind, to have a mindfulness to observe the object of consciousness related to the mind. 4. Performing mindfulness observations on the Dharma, to have a mindfulness to observe the mental phenomena and mind processing as Dharma. In performing the Buddhist practice, an insight observation on the four mindfulness foundations is considered the most important part of the practice. The sixth group of the 7 enlightenment factors for wisdom development. During performing the four mindfulness foundations, then arising the collective 7 enlightenment factors. And at the moment of enlightenment, the Buddha emphasized on the necessity to have all the 7 enlightenment factors to be ready for the enlightenment as follow.
How? The 7 factors for enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation. Here, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the enlightenment factor for the discrimination of phenomena or research on Dharma, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, the enlightenment factor of effort, the enlightenment factor of concentration, the enlightenment factor of rapture, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. It is, when the 7 factors for enlightenment are developed and cultivated in this way that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation.
The 7 factors for enlightenment can be described as follows. 1. Effort for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, we need to have a good effort throughout the practice from the beginning to the end. 2. Mindfulness for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, we need to start with initializing a mindfulness in the early part of the practice, and then maintaining the mindfulness throughout the practice, especially in performing an insight observation in the 4 mindfulness foundations. 3. Concentration for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, the mind must be concentrated so that the mindfulness will be empowered by performing the mindfulness meditation, which is specifically called the Buddhist meditation. 4. Rapture for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 2nd jhana, the mind will reach the state of rapture. A practitioner will realize that a rapture arises. 5. Tranquility for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 3rd jhana, the mind will reach the state of tranquility. A practitioner will realize that a tranquility arises. 6. Equanimity for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 4th jhana, the mind will reach the state of equanimity. A practitioner will realize that a tranquility arises and a purified mindfulness is developed to be used in an insight observation. 7. The research on Dharma. In performing the Buddhist practice for an enlightenment, after collecting sufficient and necessary information from observed mental phenomena in an insight observation, then applying the 4 noble truths to gain insight wisdom for mind liberation. It is a cognitive process of all collective information after making insight observations of the 4 mindfulness foundations from the whole process of dependent origination, then applying the 4 noble truths to realize the origin of finest defilements of taints and latent dispositions arising at the craving, the clinging, and especially at the ignorance, then gaining the knowledge of whereabout and how to eliminate all the defilements arising within the mind correctly. It is noticeable that in order to becoming successful in Buddhist practice, everyone must experience through the similar conditions of the Buddha enlightenment as described in the 7 factors for the enlightenment. The 7th group of Noble Eightfold Path. After completely contemplating the whole system of the study, then we can understand the way to improve the quality of life to be a noble person by having a right methodology in functioning daily life activities. It should be observed that the Eightfold Path is the set of 8 control points within the process of dependent origination, that is, in order to be a noble person, it is necessary and sufficient to have all the right executions at the 8 control points within the system of life as follows. The Blessed One said to the Venerable Sariputta,
Sariputta, it is said, the stream, What now is the stream?
This Noble Eightfold Path, Venerable Sir, is the stream. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration.
A stream enterer, a stream enterer. What now is a stream enterer?
One who possesses this Noble Eightfold Path, Venerable Sir, is called a stream enterer. This venerable one of such a name and clan.
Good, good, Sariputta. One who possesses this Noble Eightfold Path is a stream enterer. This venerable one of such a name and clan.
The Noble Eightfold Path as a stream is summarized as follows. 1. Right understanding. 2. Right thought. 3. Right speech. 4. Right action. 5. Right livelihood. 6. Right effort. 7. Right mindfulness. 8. Right concentration. The Buddhism is a systematic way to study life in nature. The Dharma is based on facts from the study, and practicing, not believing. And by having a right process of practice, the noble processes, the practices for an enlightenment, then the mind will be developed and reach into the correct state of processing the noble states, the results of the enlightenment accomplishment in responding to the world. The one is to address on the method of how to, while the other one is to address on what is the result. And during performing the Buddhist practice, the mind will be improved and be purified step by step throughout the process of mind development as well. Typically, after performing an insight observation, then having 7 factors for enlightenment, then gaining a wisdom of cognition on how to completely eliminate any arising defilement in the process of dependent origination, and then learning of a systematic way to live in the world with the Noble Eightfold Path. In performing a Buddhist practice, the wisdom of the Noble Eightfold Path is a summarized solution for the way of life. In addition, the Noble Eightfold Path also can be applied as a guideline for living with people in the world. In summary, the Buddha explained to the Venerable Sariputta on the Buddhist practice as the successive progression of mind development in the 37 factors for the enlightenment as follows.
By having sufficiently performing the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom and faculties, then they will collectively be a basis for the empowerments of the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom, respectively. By having sufficiently performing both the faculties and empowerments of the 5 components of faith, effort, mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom, then they will collectively be a basis for performing an insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations. By having sufficiently performing an insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations, then it will collectively be a basis for performing the 7 factors for enlightenment. By having sufficiently performing the 7 factors for enlightenment, then they will collectively be a basis for performing the Noble Eightfold Path.
Typically, by sufficiently performing a mindfulness development, a mindfulness meditation, and a mindfulness absorption, the mind will be developed in terms of faculty and empowerment to be ready for performing an insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations. And by sufficiently performing an insight observation of the 4 mindfulness foundations, the mind will contemplate the reality of the object of consciousness in relation to the 5 aggregates of being. Then the mind will develop the 7 factors for enlightenment. Finally, after attaining the 7 factors for enlightenment, then performing the 4 noble truths, and as a result insight wisdom is gained to be used in cleansing any arising defilement throughout the mind processing in the Noble Eightfold Path, resulting in the right responding to the world. The Buddha outlined the process of Buddhist practice, that the practice started from the mindfulness development, the mindfulness meditation, and the mindfulness absorption to develop the faculty and the empowerment of the mindfulness and meditation. After sufficiently practice, then proceeding on perform an insight observation in the 4 mindfulness foundation, and once collecting a sufficient information, then we can perform the research on Dharma in the 7 factors for enlightenment by applying the 4 noble truths. And finally, after gaining insight wisdom, then we perform the noble eightfold path to completely eliminate all the defilements, so that the mind will be liberated, and rightly responding to the world. In another occasion, the Buddha explained about the accomplishments in the Buddhist practice on the critical parts of the 37 factors for the enlightenment as follows.
When receiving any stimulus from the world through the 6th sense base, if it is favorable, then do not enjoy with the sensual pleasure, and if it is unfavorable, then do not be irritated by it, keeping the mind stable, not to be involved with the matter. By containing the mind on receiving stimuli from the world, then the person can reach the wholesomeness of action, body, speech, body, and thinking, mind. Thus, by having sufficiently controlling on receiving any stimulus from the world, then the 3 wholesomeness of action, speech, and thinking will be achieved. And when sufficiently having the 3 wholesomeness of action, speech, and thinking, then when performing a Buddhist practice, the mind will be calm to be ready for an insight observation, then the 4 mindfulness foundations will be achieved. By having sufficiently performing of the 4 mindfulness foundations, then the 7 factors for enlightenment will be achieved. And by having sufficiently conditions of the 7 factors for enlightenment, then insight wisdom will be achieved. Finally, by having wisdom to eliminate arising contaminants of defilements, then the liberation of mind can be achieved.